jazz. Most people think of New Orleans when it comes to this major form of musical expression. But did you know Seattle also played a part in jazz history? During the 1940s and 50s, Seattle's Central District was a jazz mecca. Quincy Jones, a Garfield High School alumni, described it as screaming around the clock. It was during this time a 16-year-old Ernestine Anderson moved to Seattle with her parents. A fan of blues and gospel, Ernestine quickly became a part of the jazz scene, singing in Garfield's jazz band as well as clubs along Seattle's Jackson Street. In no time, she was on tour with Johnny Otis's big band, Lionel Hampton's orchestra, performed on an album with jazz singer Gigi Grice, and recorded her first album under the name Hot Cargo. By 1959, Ernestine was awarded the New Star Award by Downbeat Music magazine and cemented herself as one of jazz's most important African-American vocalists. But by the 1960s, a new music genre emerged: rock and roll. And for over a decade, jazz was pushed out of the American mainstream in favor of the rock and roll craze. "I don't think jazz ever died," said Ernestine Anderson. "It suffered a setback during the 60s. I had to move to London in order to work because a jazz person couldn't work in the United States when rock and roll became the music." However, by the mid-1970s, jazz started to make a comeback, and Ernestine had a resurgence after making her legendary appearance at the 1976 Concord Jazz Festival. And by the 90s, was signed onto Quincy Jones' Quest record label, recording such albums as Now and Then and Blues, News and Love News, both of which earned her Grammy nominations. Ernestine had recorded over 30 albums and performed all around the world. Which brings us back to Seattle's Central District, where her jazz career began. There, you'll find an apartment building located between 21st and 18th Street and Jackson Street, named after her. Another note in her jazz legacy. When it comes to Seattle, the image most people think of is the Space Needle towering over the skyline. However, back in 1861, it was William Gross that towered over Seattle. Standing 6'4" and weighing over 400 pounds, William Gross was an unmistakable fixture in Seattle's early days. As the second black resident to live in Seattle, he was an African-American pioneer who helped shape Seattle into the city we know today. His story begins in 1835 in Washington, a different Washington, D.C., where he was born to a free black restaurant owner. However, Washington, D.C. was only a springboard for William Gross, who lived many lives. At age 15, he was a cook for the Navy. Later, he worked as a California gold miner. He was even an international negotiator for the Underground Railroad, helping enslaved African Americans find freedom. However, it took a bit of serendipity for William Gross to find his way to Seattle. Isaac Stevens, the governor of the Washington Territory, lost his watch, and it was William who found it and ensured its safe return. Upon arriving in Seattle, Governor Isaac Stevens encouraged William Gross to settle in Washington, and by 1876, William settled in Washington with his wife, Sarah, and 2 children, where he followed in his father's footsteps by opening a restaurant and a hotel. By 1882, Gross was so successful, he purchased 12 acres of land from Henry Yesler along East Madison Street, making him the first African American to own property in Seattle. This stretch of land would later become the center of Seattle's black community. By the 1890s, Gross was Seattle's wealthiest black resident, having formed the first black Masonic chapter and became a trustee of Seattle's first African American church. If you're wondering where Gross's hotel is today, you won't find it. It became a victim of the Great Seattle Fire in 1889. As a result, William Gross moved to his home at 2813 East Howell Street, where he lived up to his death on July 27, 1898. William Gross truly embodied the pioneer spirit and was respected in Seattle across all color lines. He was a towering man who left a big impact on Seattle, one still felt today. Lewis and Clark. Everyone knows the famous explorers who mapped the uncharted path into the Pacific Northwest, but did you know this famous duo was really a trio? This mysterious third explorer was a complex man who went by a simple name, York. But how is such an important explorer missing from the history books? Perhaps it's because at the time, he wasn't a free man. He was a slave. As a matter of fact, he was Clark's slave, given to him at the age of 14 to be his manservant. As they grew up together, York would become Clark's lifelong companion, developing a close but complicated bond, which is how York would end up accompanying Lewis and Clark on their expedition down the Columbia River. Don't confuse this for an adventure among childhood friends. Participation on this dangerous expedition was never York's choice, and his personal will and safety were never considered. Despite that, York's intelligence and exceptional skills paved the path for a successful journey. Everything about York changed on that 3-year expedition, but nothing about Clark changed. He still perceived York as a slave. What happened to York after the famed expedition is a bit of a mystery. Some say York tried to buy his freedom, but Clark refused. Others say Clark finally freed York and helped him start a business in Kentucky. One document alleges York grew to hate his freedom and died in Tennessee while trying to return to his old master. While one 1830s mountain man by the name of Zenas Leonard claims York lived an honorable life as a Crow Indian chief in the West. However, it's not his ending that's important, but how he lived. As an enslaved man who had become a member of the Corps of Discovery, the unsung hero of the Lewis, Clark, and York expedition. This is the story of Carrie Mae Weems. Born in Portland, Oregon on April 20th, 1953, art quickly took a hold of her, and by 1970, she found herself in San Francisco, where she studied modern dance from one of the best in the world, Miss Anna Halprin. However, her artistic destiny took shape in 1973 when on her 21st birthday, she was gifted a camera, sending her on a journey of artistic discovery. From San Francisco City College to Berlin, Carrie Mae captured the world through the lens of her camera, meeting amazing people like photographer P.H. Polk, Roy DeCarava, and of course, her husband, Jeff Hoon, in 1986. This began the golden age of her career with the string of photo exhibits that would secure her place in art history, such as Ain't Jokin', American Icons, the Colored People series, and perhaps her most famous and acclaimed exhibition, the Kitchen Table series, an intimate series of black and white photos reflecting a collective experience around the kitchen table, showing how life emanates from the small space we occupy in the world. Carrie Mae once said, "Let me just say that my primary concern in art, as in politics, is with the status and place of Afro-Americans in this country. And this camera gave me an incredible freedom. It gave me the ability to parade through the world and look at people very, very closely. People just like you."